At the end of the book, I have 3 chapters about kind of why is everybody so crazy on this environmental issue. And I look at money, power, and religion. And the power, definitely there's an effort by rich people in the rich countries, Greta Thunberg herself, Bill McKibben, the other characters in the book are actively trying to keep poor nations in poverty, and I think it's unconscionable.
Michael, can you hear me? Hey, it worked. So let me tell the audience
Thank you.
what we've got going here. So this is Michael Shellenberger, whose amazing new book, Apocalypse Never, which you can see right here, which is just out. It's number 7 on Amazon's most read books of the week. I don't know if all of you know this, but Amazon puts out a lot of books. If you could be number 7 on their most read list, holy cow! It's number 1 in a bunch of categories that apply to it. And Michael, would you describe yourself as an environmentalist activist still, or is that where you started and you've evolved? How would you describe yourself for the audience?
I still consider myself an environmentalist and an environmental activist. I spend a lot of my time making the case for nuclear power, which I think is one of the most important technologies in the world, certainly one of the most important environmental technologies. So, yeah, I guess you can now say I'm a best-selling author too, which is pretty cool.
The thing that I loved about your book, and by the way, I don't usually like books. I have to admit, even when I read them, I think, well, maybe I shouldn't have. But I actually loved every part of your book because your writing is excellent. It keeps me engaged the whole time because your personal story was woven in with it all. Would you say that if you and Greta Thunberg were ever in the same room, that the matter and the antimatter would make you both explode and disappear?
Yeah, would be a very interesting experiment, wouldn't it? I would want a lot of other people to be present, that's for sure.
It would be quite a show. All right, so your book is sort of a tour through the environmental, not only the history and the psychology of it, which I found actually the most interesting part was the psychology of how we got to where we are in various ways. But when you looked into everything from solar to wind to the Amazon rainforest and all this, and you've done deep dives in all of these, where were you most surprised, and what would be the most surprising to the audience in terms of things that people generally believe to be true that just aren't true?
Oh man, there's so many of them. I mean, I think one of the most fun, the 2 most fun chapters in a way were the chapters that on plastic waste and on meat, because these are 2 topics that I had certainly read about, but I had never really properly researched, much less consider myself an expert on. So, I mean, one of the most surprising things was, I opened this chapter on plastic by describing this very famous viral YouTube video where a marine biologist pulls a plastic straw out of the nose of a sea turtle. And I learned more about the history of these sea turtles. And one of the things I learned is that they were being over harvested. They were being killed for their shells to make tortoise shell glasses. The tortoise shell was misnamed. It was sea turtle because sea turtle shells were the original plastic, the original bioplastic. So it turns out that the plastics that we use today made from petroleum products actually helped to save sea turtles. They also helped to save elephants because they were substitutes for the ivory in elephant tusks. So it was stories like that where you discover these things that you're told are super terrible often had a really important role in protecting the environment,
Yeah,
even plastic.
the surprising part about that is that the sea turtle that had the straw up his nose, I didn't even know sea turtles did cocaine, so that was surprising to me. Uh, no, turtles don't do cocaine. I just made that up. All right, so one of the things I found most powerful about your book is the people who want to save the world seem to be destroying it, and they don't know why. They don't know it. Can you walk us through what a developing nation needs to do to become a good nation, and can they get there with solar power?
Yeah, I mean, this is. I mean, I joke that because I wrote this. I wrote this book. I dedicate this book to my children who are the ages 14 and 21. So I wanted people to be able to read it who were just 14 years old. So I told a lot of really. I try to make it as simple as possible with a lot of stories. And I talked about how really the process of economic development, unless you're Saudi Arabia, is basically the same everywhere. You go from having a country where almost everybody is a small farmer to getting factories, people working in cities, and that the only way to do that is by moving away from renewables, away from wood and dung, water wheels, towards fossil fuels. And to some extent, hydroelectric dams are very important. Hydroelectric dams, I consider the highest form of renewables because they provide so much reliable power. But really, it's a story of rising energy consumption. Increased energy consumption is actually good for the environment because energy is a substitute for matter, which is what we call the natural environment. So yeah, I mean the reason this trend I condemn, I criticize here, which is this idea that we should stop funding hydroelectric dams, roads, electrical grids, modern agriculture, and instead the World Bank is giving small farmers a solar panel and a battery and saying, "Hey, good luck with that. It's simply not going to work."
Um, so, would it be fair to say that environmentalists, if they got their way, would lock all of the poor people into poverty basically forever? Because nobody's figured out how to get out of poverty without doing it the way you just mentioned. So, would
Yeah, I mean,
Greta would be destroying the lives of poor people forever?
yeah, I mean, what they would say is, well, we should help them with some charity, but for sure, the idea, and in fact, they've succeeded. They've basically persuaded the World Bank, the European Development Bank, all the big international development banks, whose purpose after World War II was to lift everybody out of poverty. They have diverted basically all of that money from energy that can lift people out of poverty, whether it's a hydroelectric dam, a coal plant, or a nuclear plant, to these little charitable experiments, a solar panel on a hut. They've actually also denied countries the money they need for irrigation, fertilizer, tractors, which is the basis for, because when you have factories in cities, you have fewer farmers and they have to grow more food. It's just really simple. So yeah, I mean, it's an agenda that basically, at the end of the book, I have 3 chapters about kind of why is everybody so crazy on this environmental issue. And I look at money, power, and religion. And the power, definitely there's an effort by rich people in the rich countries, Greta Thunberg herself, Bill McKibben, the other characters in the book are actively trying to keep poor nations in poverty, and I think it's unconscionable.
So that's the most amazing part about this, and I've always tried to figure out why people have different opinions on things where science should be the only opinion, and the environmental one is the most amazing one. And I don't know anybody who's looked into it as much as you have, who has your, I'll say, talent stack, the ability to analyze things and communicate them. I don't know anybody who comes down on a different side when they dig into it as much as you have. And it feels like the environmentalists are, in some cases, just doing things for money or whatever. But in many cases, I think they just don't have as deep a talent stack. In other words, they're just not capable of looking at the field in its entirety. They're just seeing part of the field. Does it feel like that to you?
I mean, I think I would say yes in some ways. I mean, what's striking to me, Scott, is that environmentalists, the people who want to control the energy and food production all around the world through the United Nations. This is not some conspiracy theory. I document all of this in the book. Um, these are people that have never spent any time in poor countries. These are people who have really never spent any time in the productive sectors of their own country's energy and food economies. I mean, I always joke that, nobody's more alienated from nature than environmentalists. Environmentalists are people that live in the city. They want to put huge industrial wind turbines in the airshed of birds, bats, and insects in places where they don't live. But if you ever get a wind turbine proposed for the coast of California or for the coast of Cape Cod, those of us in the rich cities and the rich coast shut that down immediately. So there's a lot of hypocrisy at work. There's a lot of ignorance. It's hard to pull them apart exactly.
Now, for the benefit of the audience, give us your view of climate change. Is it man-made? Is it alarming? Give us your overview on where you think climate change is heading.
So my view is that climate change is real, but it's not the end of the world. It's not even our most important environmental problem. I think it's taken up way more of our attention and money and time than it should. It's led us to not only neglect what I see as more serious environmental problems, which would be things like the loss of habitat and rainforests and the fragmentation of forests for endangered species, poverty, the overconsumption of wild animals, including fish. We've basically forgotten about all those problems. They don't even really get into the newspapers much anymore. And then it's led people to do things that are clearly harmful. I mean, the first one, and part of my motivation for writing the book, is that they've contributed to rising anxiety and depression among adolescents. I'm not saying they're the sole cause, but they're certainly part of it.
Yeah, when I grew up, we were taught that there was going to be a nuclear war in our lifetime, and we'd probably all be dead, and it definitely had an effect on my whole mental makeup, probably permanently. And I can't imagine that that's not messing up kids. You talk about there's a fascinating part toward the end of the book where you're talking about maybe the psychological underpinnings of the death cults. Can you say something about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, the last chapter in the book, and you, I think I ended up actually hiring somebody from Extinction Rebellion, which is crazy. But basically, the last part of the book, I'm in London. I'm actually advocating for nuclear. I went to 10 Downing Street. I went to Parliament, met with former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, and I was making the case for nuclear. But I'm like trying to get through Trafalgar Square, and it's just this crazy Extinction Rebellion protest. Thousands of people are arrested, and it's very disturbing. I mean, they have up signs that say things like "climate change kills children," which is just ridiculous. It's like pseudoscience. So I spent some time trying to figure out what's going on here. Like, what is this? Well, obviously, or maybe not obviously, but I think it's very clear when I review the research, and I certainly think about my own history, that this is a religious movement. You could say it's a religious cult. I quote somebody, one of the best British columnists on this, called it a upper middle class death cult, which is not inaccurate.
Right.
And so what's going on? And I sort of point out that really these are, apocalyptic environmentalists tend to be people who don't believe in traditional religion, but they still have the need to believe in something. They still have the need for for transcendence, for some sense of immortality.
Now, do you think that sense of immortality is that they're saving the world, so that's their legacy? How does the need for immortality, or our basic need to feel like we have some lasting effect, is that where it is in saving the world?
Yeah, it's really exaggerated, right? I mean, it's like a Marvel superhero story of yourself. I contrast it. Like, if I look at my parents, when my kids and my brothers and sisters' kids, when we're all home for Christmas, my parents are the happiest I ever see them because they see their grandkids. They are immortal, right? They see that they are living on through their grandkids. That's a healthy, normal fantasy or story of immortality that they have. I think for this idea that as a person, I'm going to save the planet from climate change. I mean, it's identical in structure to a Marvel superhero story. It's so over the top. It's so ridiculous. And what we find is that basically a lot of what these apocalyptic environmentalists, the story they're telling, is a Judeo-Christian story, of saving the whole planet from Armageddon. But they don't even know that they think they're just talking science. They think that they're actually describing the world as it is. They don't know that they're in the grip of a religion.
Yeah, and one of the hardest things for anybody is to know what you don't know. And one of the things that I've noticed is that the environmental movement skews young. Wouldn't you say that it's a young person's movement? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's I see a lot of the leaders and the activists in the apocalyptic climate change movement being adolescents and middle-aged people, which are is a kind of two existential moments in your life where you're kind of like, who am I? What am I doing here? What is my purpose? You have it as an adolescent, and then you often have a midlife crisis. So I think it reflects some some personal insecurity that people have around their own lives, and then they become part of a movement, and it gives their lives meaning.
But ultimately, if I could sort of break it down like this, I mean, the difference between an environmentalist activist and what you are is that you know more than they do. I mean, it kind of comes down to that, isn't it? You've just looked into it in more detail, and so you can see the whole field, and you can see that, for example, solar isn't going to solve all our problems. But the person who hasn't done the work is going to say, well, Elon Musk says solar is going to work without realizing that Elon Musk is a competitor to other forms of energy, which is one of the things you talk about. Can you say something about that? About how what is it that's caused people to think that solar could solve their problems when it's so obvious that it can't?
Well, that's right. I mean, when you see people, this incredible love for renewables and the anger that people have at you when you point out all of the obvious problems with it, like the wind turbines are spinning blades that kill a lot of endangered species, or that the solar panels require covering 400 times more land than a natural gas or a nuclear plant require. When you just point out those problems, advocates of renewables, apocalyptic environmentalists, they get really angry in the same way that like a true believer gets mad when you suggest that their God isn't real.
Right.
So, I think it's clear. You see it in all of the literature. You see it in the advertising. Renewables have always been viewed as a way to harmonize human society with nature. So nature ends up playing the role of God, and where we used to try to get right by God and by God's laws, there's now, by supposedly secular people, an effort to get right by nature, and science becomes kind of a new religion.
I've always noticed people always have this need to be part of something that's bigger than themselves and maybe get approval from something bigger than themselves. So, as you're talking about, it's like you try to get God's approval if you're a believer, but if you're not a believer, maybe you need nature's approval. Maybe we're just wired, so we need that approval from the bigger power. Um, I gotta ask you about nuclear. Is our country going in the right direction finally? I know the president doesn't say much about nuclear, but the Department of Energy does seem to be doing some things. Is it moving in the right direction, in your opinion?
Not really, unfortunately. I'm afraid the nuclear industry itself is committed to manage decline. They announce a lot of R&D projects, but honestly, there is no effort to maintain our existing nuclear plants or build new ones. So what we've
But
got is a lot of demonstration projects, I think, that are attempted to kind of make us feel better about a basically bad situation.
now, is that not, at least in part, because there's some desire to get to so-called Generation 4 that we don't know how to do yet exactly? So there's some iteration and testing, and the government, they built some kind of a test facility to do that, didn't they? Or they're building it?
Yeah, that's the idea. I mean, the problem is I've just done so much. I just know so much about the history of this that we see this repeatedly, where there's all these demonstration efforts. There's been so many prototypes and demonstration reactors made, and they don't ever go anywhere. I mean, what really gets nuclear plants built is when utilities decide to build plants, and they usually end up building the same kind of plant or a very similar kind of plant to one that's been operating. So, my concern is not that I have no problem with the demonstration efforts. My problem is that we're not doing the things that the Russians and the Chinese and the French and the people that are serious about having a nuclear expansion are doing, which is to build full-size light water reactors. That's why I'm so obsessed with Britain right now. Britain's considering building 6 full-size light water reactors. It's got 2 under construction. That's what it looks like when countries are going seriously on nuclear, and unfortunately, we're not doing that.
And for our audience that's not up to date, the types of nuclear that other countries are looking at building would all be type 3? Would you call it, a third generation, which has never had a meltdown that killed anybody yet. Is that true?
Oh yeah, of course. Really, we haven't had a. Even Fukushima's radiation didn't kill anybody, and that was Gen 2. So yeah, it's Gen 3. These are, in some ways, honestly, they're just over-engineered. In the book, I talk about the fear of nuclear and the deep irrationality and ideological nature of the fears. But my view has always been on nuclear that we too often make the perfect the enemy of the good, and really what works is to just get practice building, have the same guys building the same reactors over time. That's how costs come down.
If you were to say, you were the president of the United States instantly, and you were going to say, all right, I'm going to fix nuclear energy in this country, would you look at forced standardization? Would you just get out of the way and remove regulations if some of them are unnecessary? I don't even know if they are. But where's the lever? What would you focus on to change first to fix it?
The most important thing is to have a national consensus on a long-term plan for taking nuclear from 20% to 50% of our electricity by 2050. I think that's a pretty reasonable goal. You would then work with the utilities and the states, because we do have a fragmented utility system. Most countries, it's a single utility or a couple of them. We have so many utilities because we're such a big country. The most important thing is to have a goal and work towards it. And then I think standardization would be the obvious way.
But I thought the real problem is that the economics don't work because it just takes so long to get it approved. If you don't fix that, it doesn't matter how much leadership you have, does it?
If you're doing unapproved designs, sure, but we have a perfectly great, it's really great, advanced pressurized water-cooled reactor called the AP1000. They're building 2 of them in Georgia. Those workers are literally a national asset. Those construction workers, because they know how to pour cement and make rebar and weld at nuclear grade standards. After they're done, they should move up the road to South Carolina and build 2 more nuclear reactors there. You would basically, if they have a national building program, it would just spread, because the key is that the workers themselves, there's so much specialized skills involved, speaking of skill stacking, that these workers, it's tragic. If we don't build more nuclear plants after those 2 AP1000s, we're going to lose so much valuable asset in those workers. It's scary to me.
Is this the same kind of skill? I know pouring concrete is not the same skill you'd need to make a nuclear engine for a submarine or for later for a space force. But we have the same problem, right? Because space will be nuclear powered. That's a guarantee, isn't it?
Oh yeah. If you're serious.
So if we don't have a big nuclear energy capability, a robust full industry in the United States, we're not going to own space. And whoever owns space owns the Earth. That's pretty much a guarantee, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. I think I haven't done enough with this question. I'm very interested in space. I'm very interested in national security implications of space. And you're right. Really, nuclear, the innovation on nuclear has really come from the military. That's how we got our existing light water designs. And the pro-nuclear left has often condemned our existing light water technology by saying it came from the military, but that's the strength of it. That's where our microchips came from. That's where personal computers came from. That's where the internet came from.
Yeah, right.
Why are we embarrassed about the military roots of these technologies? That's why they're so great.
Right. Yeah, that's a weird thing to be angry at. Michael, is there anything you want to leave us with? I'm going to go on to some other topics here. And is there anything that we need to know that I didn't ask?
I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you, Scott, for plugging the book. I hope people get it. You should know that I've been now censored twice. I was censored by Forbes, who took down my original column announcing the book, and then I was censored by Facebook after an absolutely outrageous, unscientific attack on my book by a sort of star chamber of climate apocalyptic jerks who basically got my article censored on Facebook. So please sign up at Environmental Progress to get updates directly from me. Please buy the book. I would love to hear from readers. It's really exciting to have the conversation.
All right. It's Apocalypse Never, Michael Shellenberger. It's bestseller written all over it, and it's already a bestseller. And congratulations on the book. This is a really good book. I mean, it really is. You did a great job on this. So thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Scott.
All right, take care.
Take care.